Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome again to the poem of the day for today, Thursday, August 21st, 2025. And we're joined again by our friend Cooper back there on my chair. As I'm recording these in the afternoons and evenings now, he spent a pretty busy day playing with a bunch of other dogs, so he's wiped out today over at my reading chair. We're returning to Emily Dickinson. This will be our, I think, fourth day in a row on Emily Dickinson. And the poem that I have chosen for today from her collection is in some ways, I think, the most inaccessible poem that we've done thus far from Emily Dickinson. And I think it expresses a particular mood and a particular emotion, but as opposed to yesterday's poem, the I'm Nobody poem, which calls the reader in to participate directly with the feelings and emotions of the speaker, this one keeps everybody, I think, keeps the readers at bay in particular ways. And I'll explain that a little bit more after I've read. But this is another one that's rather famous of hers and people might have encountered before. It's number 320, in other words, known as There's a Certain Slant of Light from 1862. So this is 320 by Emily Dickinson from 1862. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it, any, 'tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So, some of the interesting formal aspects of this poem, like many of hers, this is a 16-line poem. It's 4 stanzas divided into quatrains each. And so we have, again, that kind of 4-3-4-3 ballad structure that is common in Emily Dickinson's work, as well as the alternating rhyme and some slant rhyme forced into the end rhymes there. You also likely heard a couple prominent uses of alliteration, particularly the heavenly hurt that is in there. And there's also personification of aspects of nature, specifically in the 4th quatrain with the landscape listens, the shadows hold their breath. I think the key idea of the poem is the simile comparing the light of winter afternoons that's cast upon what I'm reading as the ground. I just see a snowy ground, despite the fact that she doesn't actually describe it that way. Having a weight to it, like a cathedral tune. I'm hearing in that something being funeral-like. Again, she doesn't mention it, but I think it's inferred specifically of having kind of a large organ, ominous funeral tune there. And in that central simile, there's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. That simile is so loaded because it accomplishes synesthesia. It's linking together at least 3 different senses as we pull it apart. So the slant of light is something that can be seen. The oppression and the heft is something that can be felt. And then the cathedral tune is something that can be heard. And so the joining and the linking together of those 3 senses makes this opening quatrain a synesthetic experience. It grounds it in some very vivid and evocative imagery. But then immediately after, this is a place where I'm finding it hard to access the poem as a reader. She begins, heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. I'm not sure what to do with this heavenly hurt. It feels like it could be suggestive of sort of a God's punishment. It also feels like it might be slightly oxymoronic because heaven is supposed to be a place where all the tears are wiped clean. So the nature of the heavenly hurt is difficult to me. And she says that we can find no scar, but there's an internal indifference. And to me, this speaks to the feeling of melancholy, of something that weighs heavily upon people, the feeling of, even kind of a pressing into your chest, but something that isn't often rendered into an actual physical injury. Um, and we hear this in the third quatrain with the seal despair, but then we get it referred to again as an imperial affliction. And I think the imperial affliction is meant to rename the heavenly hurt. An imperial affliction seems even less personalized and more politicized than the theology behind the heavenly hurt that's there. And so in the fourth quatrain, we're left then with when this light comes that oppresses, the landscape listens and the shadows hold their breath. And the inaccessibility for me of the poem comes from it not being grounded in a relatable speaker in the way that, not to say that melancholy is not relatable, but there isn't a specific eye, there isn't a apprehension of the reader as there was in the poem that we had yesterday. And yet the speaker in this poem is either personifying the landscape and the shadows in a way in which they're experiencing kind of this entire scene wrapped up all in one and feeling as though, as we spoke in previous iterations of this short series, that nature is imbued with some sort of spirit of God. Or I think there's also like a little bit of a paranoia in here. The shadows holding their breath is something that's rather foreboding. And the landscape, which landscapes are often described, at least in the transcendental tradition, as being pastoral and transcendent, is merely kind of sitting by and is passive and is listening. And we get the last line of the poem, when it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So there's the seeing of the light in winter is tied to a look of death. That what the light illuminates to the speaker, in addition to sounding memories of cathedral tunes that might be funeral-like, in my reading, is this look of death personified, as though the melancholy is reminding you that, death as a form of sort of grim reaper is out looking for you. And so winter is embodying this sense of inevitable decline and decay and death, which is such a turn given that the first line of the poem is there is a certain slant of light, which makes me want to think of light cutting through a darkness or cutting through something that's empty and something that's filled with despair. But in fact, what it seems to be doing is it seems to be illuminating the qualities of the winter afternoon that are cold and distancing for the speaker. I could be way off with this. I find this again to be a very challenging poem, and it's not one that I'm particularly comfortable with my own reading of. But because of that, I wanted to encounter it again. I've read this poem multiple times. And if somebody has alternative readings, or if there's anything that you'd like to press on there, I would love to hear from people. Otherwise, enjoy your day, and may you have a peaceful one.